Aldi breaks most of the rules of modern retail. It cuts comfort, limits choice, and runs stores that feel unfinished on purpose. And yet today, Aldi is on track to become the second largest grocery chain in the US, behind only Walmart. And they're only growing stronger in the US with every passing year. Aldi's loyal shoppers understand why it works, but outside the stores, many still underestimate how powerful this model has become. I have a confession. I worked at Aldi for 4 years, and I helped to lead their California expansion. I've personally seen how decisions get made on the corporate side, how obsessively costs are tracked, and how differently Aldi thinks compared to almost every other grocery chain in America. And that's what this episode today is all about. I'm Sammi Cohen, and this is Social Currency, a podcast that unpacks the stories that are shaping business, culture, and the intersection of the two. Before we get into the history or the headlines about Aldi, this is not a hype piece. It is a breakdown of how Aldi actually works, why its model scales when others don't, and why so many competitors misunderstand what they're really competing against. And since the cost of food prices have obviously ballooned in the US and around the world over the past few years, Aldi has reached a new level of fandom as 17 million new customers visited an Aldi location in 2025. According to a press release on their own website, 1 in 3 US households shopped at Aldi last year. This impact that Aldi has had on America is profound, and it's growing tremendously year over year. And I want to call out that a lot of this background information and market data came from a recent Bloomberg piece called The Curious Cult of Aldi. It is a fantastic read, so I highly recommend you check it out. And of course, I'm drawing from my own work experience, and I'm sharing how Aldi operates since I got to see how the corporate side worked firsthand, and I personally opened 3 Aldi stores in the Southern California market. So if you listen through to the end of the episode, I'll share the single internal rule that guide more decisions than anything else when I worked there. It's a rule that explains why Aldi can expand aggressively without breaking its model, and why many retailers fail the moment they try to copy it. Once you hear that rule, Aldi's success will make a lot more sense to you. First, let's talk about Aldi's beginnings. Aldi began in Germany after World War II, in a country rebuilding from economic collapse. The business started out as a small family grocery store run by 2 brothers, Karl and Theo Albrecht. At the time they started the business, money was scarce and customers were cautious, so of course these conditions shaped their business strategy. The brothers stocked only what moved quickly, so they had 1 or 2 options of each type of product that they sold. They avoided anything that required extra handling or labor, and over time, they learned that fewer choices for the customer reduced complexity and lowered costs. And those lowered costs created room to win on the pricing without sacrificing quality. That early discipline became the company's foundation that still remains in place today. As the business expanded across Germany, the brothers made an unusual decision. In the early 1960s, they split the company into 2 independent groups, Aldi Nord, aka Aldi North, and Aldi Süd, aka Aldi South. Legend has it that this split was initially decided because one of the brothers wanted to sell cigarettes and the other one didn't. The split was geographic at first, but it led to different paths. Theo led Aldi Nord, and in 1971, Theo was actually kidnapped in his home country. At the time, Theo and his brother Karl were well known as very wealthy businessmen because of the grocery success that they had had. Theo was kidnapped right outside of his office in Germany, and he eventually was released after his wife paid a ransom, and the kidnappers were eventually caught and they served jail time. After this whole kidnapping situation, the family famously became even more reclusive, and they always wanted to stay out of the public eye. They rarely gave interviews. The other brother, the one who was not kidnapped, that is Karl Albrecht, and he led Aldi Süd. Aldi Süd focused on exporting the core model abroad. This is the group that eventually became what Americans know today as Aldi in the US. Aldi Nord took a different approach. Instead of expanding the Aldi brand everywhere, it made more selective bets. And one of those bets turned out to be critical. In 1979, Aldi Nord acquired a small but distinctive grocery chain in California called Trader Joe's. At the time, Trader Joe's looked quite different from Aldi in Europe. However, there were a lot of similarities between the two as well. They had a tight assortment compared to bigger grocery stores, and they also relied on a lot of private labels. Most importantly, there was obsession with cost control behind the scenes. The split between Aldi Nord and Aldi Süd had many consequences. cases, some of these were good and some of them were more limiting. Aldi Nord and Aldi Süd operate independently with separate leadership and ownership structures. To this day, they collaborate very selectively, but they do not function as a single global company. And that's where some people get confused. Some people think that Trader Joe's in the US is actually run operationally quite similarly to Aldi in the US, but that's not the case. And the separation between the two companies slowed some decisions, and it also limited scale advantages. It also preserved the discipline that each side developed on its own. Aldi entered America slowly, starting in the Midwest in 1976, and it didn't really explain itself to shoppers. For years, it remained a regional player that many consumers misunderstood. From Aldi's leadership perspective, they had a very Jeff Bezos-esque long-term mindset. Aldi didn't want to be the loudest player because they were focused on the fact that customers would want low prices for very high-quality products, and that's exactly what they were building. They knew that the strategy would prove to win in the long term because people always want high-value products at a low price. And now, to understand how Aldi has exploded in the US over the last decade, it helps to zoom out and look at where the company sits in relation to the entire grocery landscape in 2026. Aldi is officially one of the fastest-growing grocery operators in the country by store count and footprint. Its US revenue has climbed into the tens of billions of dollars annually, and its expansion plans put it on track to operate more stores than nearly every other competitor except Walmart. And by the end of 2028, they plan to have 3,200 stores. The rising prices across the entire industry and labor-heavy store formats have created a massive space for a simpler alternative. Aldi is stepping into that gap with tremendous confidence. At the same time, Aldi's customer base has changed over the years. Early growth in the US has leaned heavily on budget-conscious households, yet today, new stores increasingly open in middle and higher income areas. The appeal of shopping at Aldi is no longer limited to necessity. It's now driven by trust in the Aldi brand and their products. Plus, people of all wealth brackets like to know that they're saving money on their shopping bill. Aldi has also become more visible culturally without trying to be. Social media communities on Reddit discuss weekly finds and shoppers share discoveries. None of this is orchestrated by their marketing spend, though. It emerges from their cult shoppers who love Aldi's consistency and scarcity. There are fan accounts that share the sunsets across Aldi parking lots around the world. No, seriously, you should look this up. It's pretty wild. And there are diehard fans who chose to get engaged in front of an Aldi location. I would venture to say that the Aldi fandom is approaching the level of the Trader Joe's fandom now. So next, we'll move from the big picture into the mechanics. How Aldi thinks about its operations is how Aldi thinks about its entire business model. To understand why Aldi scales the way it does, you have to look at how the stores actually operate day to day. This is where theory meets reality. An Aldi store is designed to minimize movement. Products move from the truck to the floor with as few touches as possible. Items stay in their original boxes with pre-perforated sections so employees can quickly tear cardboard and put the box on the shelf for customers to buy right away. The shelving is standardized. All of this reduces time, labor, and error. The assortment is also intentionally narrow. Fewer products simplify ordering, forecasting, and inventory management. Suppliers produce limited variations, the store teams restock faster, and customers make decisions quicker. The system benefits at every step. And the labor element is also wild, so we need to talk about how the labor works. Each store runs with a very lean team. Each team member is a jack of all trades and is expected to be able to work all of the areas of the store, from the freezer to the produce section to the cash register. Employees rotate between roles instead of specializing narrowly, and productivity expectations are high. Performance is measured very closely. To reiterate this, because many people haven't worked at a grocery store before, this is not how it works in bigger box grocery stores, where people are usually a lot more specialized in the scope of their work. And I also want to focus on the productivity of every single store employee that works at Aldi. When I worked at Aldi, one of the very common practices was for each manager to have a sheet that hung in the office that showed the very specific scanning times of every single employee. So every employee knew week over week how quickly they were scanning items at the register, and every single employee was pushed to keep moving up their scores. And in return for these higher expectations and job responsibilities, wages at Aldi are higher than many retail benchmarks. Then there's the whole checkout experience, which is a whole experience into itself. We all know that Aldi checkout is optimized for speed, and there are many memes about it. Also, if you haven't seen the memes, they're pretty hilarious. Barcodes are placed in multiple areas on the food packaging for fast scanning. Bagging is removed from the cashier's workflow, and the customers are expected to bag their own own groceries themselves. This allows Aldi to handle volume without adding staff. Store hours are shorter than their competitors, and that choice also limits payroll and concentrates traffic. Peak periods become more predictable and scheduling becomes simpler. The store operates closer to full capacity during the open hours. And you also need a quarter, which is one of the many nuances of Aldi's operations. And this quarter unlocks a cart from the cart corral, which is a very old school practice, but the company says that they don't need to hire an additional person at each store because people are incentivized to get their quarter back when they plug the cart into the corral station after they're done loading up their groceries. And of course, we need to talk about the private label of it all. Over 90% of packaged products within an Aldi store are their own private label instead of a national brand. This means that the private label products are designed for Aldi's systems rather than retrofitted into it. Packaging, case size, and shelf fit are planned together. This massively helps with Aldi's pricing control, and they'll also create certain private label food items that look very, very similar to the name brand item and put the two items next to each other on the shelves. This has gotten to a boiling point with many brands, especially because Aldi has been so successful at this. We even had Mondelez, which is the conglomerate behind Oreos and Chips Ahoy and many other brands, who actually sued Aldi last year for their private label products that were clearly designed to look like products from Mondelez. So now I want to add a few things about my own personal experience while I worked at Aldi. So I started at Aldi right out of college and went to work in their Chicagoland area because their headquarters are in Batavia, Illinois. I was trained to become a district manager, and they have a fascinating program that is still in place today where they make you work in the stores to train you on every single role before you eventually managed the stores. So I was trained in a store on the south side of Chicago, and I would wake up every morning at 4:15 a.m. to be at the store at 5 a.m. to start stocking the shelves and preparing the store for its open at 9 a.m. After working as a cashier, they eventually move you to a shift manager and then to a store manager. This felt crazy at the time because I was a 22-year-old who was then managing a team of 14 to 16 people, all who were anywhere from 5 to 20 to 30 years older than I was. It was the absolute best training I could have ever asked for because eventually when I went on to become a district manager, and a district manager oversees 4 to 5 stores of their own and manages their financials, I was able to pull from this personal experience and deeply understand what it was like to work in and run these stores from the ground level. Aldi's district manager training program is really well known in the retail industry, and after going through it, I really do think it was the best possible retail training I could have ever received. Obviously, now it's been around a decade since I was in that position, and I still think back on that training quite often and think about how thorough and how incredible it was. I also want to call out one of the major negatives, though, to so many of Aldi's intentional strategic decisions. Many of these key decisions are also why Aldi's store presentation is consistently behind the presentation of other grocery stores. Aldi shelves can look quite rough, or the popular items can look like they're sold out because someone didn't have time to restock the shelves when you were shopping. Even though Aldi corporate teams would never say this out loud, these shortcomings are basically the accepted outcomes of prioritizing cost control over the store presentation. Now that we've talked about the stores themselves, I also want to talk about the Aldi customer. The customers who love Aldi learn the rules and eventually grow to appreciate them. I've always believed that much of Aldi's success comes from the way that they've tapped into consumer psychology. Aldi asks customers to do more than most grocery chains ever do. Shoppers tolerate stores that tend to look sloppier than most other grocery stores, so on paper, this should repel people. But in practice, many customers adapt quickly. The first reason is very obvious. It's the price. Prices remain low and stable week after week, and shoppers learn that they don't need to hunt for sales or compare across stores. That low cost reliability reduces mental effort, and over time, trust replaces comparison. The second reason is decision relief. A narrow assortment limits cognitive load. Shoppers move faster because there are fewer trade-offs to evaluate. And for many people, fewer options feels like a service. Scarcity also plays a role as well. Rotating products in limited quantities in sections of the store, such as their Aldi Find section, creates this sense of urgency and a sense of a treasure hunt. When a customer knows that an item is available for a limited time and they may not ever see it again, it makes customers feel as if shopping there is filled with these fleeting moments. So throughout this episode, we've talked about the history, the operations, and customer behavior. All of that traces back to a single internal rule that has guided more decisions than anything else when I worked there. Every meaningful choice came down to one question: does this reduce the total cost of serving the customer over time? That question sounds simple, but in practice, it's ruthless. It removes ideas that sound exciting but add labor. It removes features that look friendly but introduce unnecessary complexity. What survives are decisions that protect long-term price integrity, even if they create short-term discomfort. And it also explains why the model holds together as the company grows. New stores aren't expected to invent their own logic. The system stays coherent because the rules rarely change. And most organizations struggle with this kind of discipline. They allow exceptions or they add layers to solve local problems. Over time, costs rise and clarity fades. Aldi avoids this outcome entirely by refusing to negotiate with complexity. That refusal is the real competitive advantage that they have. And once you understand this rule, Aldi's rise feels very earned. The company didn't predict the future of grocery retail, it just prepared for pressure and waited. When the market shifted, its assumptions were already in place. So the next time you walk into an Aldi, you'll notice different things. Not just the prices, but the trade-offs that made those prices possible. And if you're building or running a business of your own, the lessons from Aldi extend well beyond grocery stores. Building a business with clarity around your clear value proposition is essential, and you need the discipline to make sure that your business doesn't stray from providing that value to your customers. Aldi is simply a case study in what happens when a company never forgets that. And that is a wrap on today's episode. Let me know what you think in the comments about Aldi because I would love to hear them. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next time. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Social Currency. Before you go, take a second to subscribe to the show wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode. And if you liked what you heard today, please rate and review the podcast. It massively helps the work I do to bring this show to life. And if you have a friend who is as obsessed with business and culture as you are, send this episode to them because sharing the show is one of the best ways to support it. And if you want to keep up with the hottest business lore in real time, follow me on Instagram at Sammi Cohen Talks and subscribe to my newsletter, Social Currency, linked in the show notes. Social Currency is a production of Social Currency Media and Money News Network. The podcast is hosted and executive produced by me, Sammi Cohen, and produced by the Money News Network team. See you next time.